The red earth of the village was warm beneath bare feet, soft like powdered clay after the harmattan winds had passed. Narrow paths curved between round mud houses with thatched roofs, their walls painted with white chalk designs that told stories older than memory. At the center of the village stood a great baobab tree, its trunk wide and patient, its branches stretching toward the wide African sky. The sky had watched generations come and go. It had seen babies born, promises made, tears shed, and graves covered. Nothing escaped its silent gaze. Every morning, the sound of roosters mixed with the rhythm of pestles pounding yam. Women greeted one another at the well. Men walked together to the farms, hoes resting on their shoulders. Children chased goats through the dust, their laughter rising like birds startled into flight. When the sun fell low, the elders gathered beneath the baobab. Drums spoke in steady beats, and stories flowed like a river that never ran dry. The oldest man would clear his throat and say, "A family without unity is like a calabash with cracks." The children would lean forward, eyes bright, knowing that wisdom was about to be poured into their ears. In that village, a name was not just a word. It was a living thing. It carried the honor of ancestors and the pride of unborn generations. The people believed a son guarded that name like a warrior guards his shield. "A boy keeps the fire of the lineage burning," the elders would often say. Land passed from father to son. Goats and farmland, titles and praise songs, all flowed through the male line. Daughters, though loved in many homes, were sometimes spoken of like passing rain. "She will marry and water another family's soil," some would whisper. A girl's laughter was sweet, but in certain compounds, her presence was counted as temporary. She would one day leave, carrying her strength to another household. And so, motherhood in that village was a crown placed upon a woman's head, but the crown shone brightest when she bore a son. A woman who gave birth to a boy walked taller. Her greetings were warmer. Her seat at gatherings was closer to the elders. But if daughters came instead, some smiles would tighten, and some hearts would grow restless. It was into this world that Amina lived as a new bride. Amina was gentle in speech and steady in work. Her eyes were patient, like someone who understood that good things grow slowly. Each morning, she swept the compound before the sun fully rose. She fetched water without complaint and prepared meals with care. When she laughed, it was soft, never loud enough to draw attention. She carried hope the way a woman carries water in a clay pot, balanced, careful, never wanting to spill a single drop. The older women often said, "That girl has a calm spirit." Even when tired, she did not speak harshly. Even when corrected, she bowed her head in respect. She believed that kindness was strength, not weakness. Her husband, Tund, loved her in his quiet way. He would sometimes watch her from the doorway, pride shining in his eyes. But Tund was a son raised under firm hands. From childhood, he had learned that his mother's word was heavy like stone. To question her was to invite shame. He walked carefully between love for his wife and obedience to his mother, feeling the pull of both like ropes tied around his chest. His mother, Mama Adunni, was known across the village. Her back was straight despite her age. Her voice could cut through noise like a knife through ripe fruit. She had worked the land through drought and storm. She had buried a husband and raised her son alone. Hardship had shaped her into iron. "To survive, you must be strong," she would say. "And strength comes from sons who carry your name." In her eyes, boys were pillars that held the roof of a family upright. Girls, though precious, were leaves that would one day fall and be carried by another wind. Mama Adunni did not see this belief as cruelty. To her, it was truth handed down from her own mother, and from the mothers before that. She carried tradition like an unbreakable staff in her hand. When she spoke of ancestors, her voice grew firm. "We do not break the ways that kept us alive," she would remind anyone who dared question her. So the compound of Tund's family stood beneath the wide sky, strong but filled with quiet expectations. The red earth held secrets. The baobab watched in silence. And like the first rumble of thunder before a storm, unseen pressure began to gather in the heart of that household. For in a village where sons were praised as rising suns, and daughters sometimes treated as passing rain, even the gentlest breeze could one day grow into a wind that changed everything. For many seasons, Amina's womb had been as quiet as dry soil waiting for rain. Each month that passed without news felt like another dusty wind blowing through her heart. The women at the well had begun to look at her with eyes full of questions. Some spoke softly, others did not bother to hide their thoughts. At dawn, before even the roosters cleared their throats, Amina would kneel behind the compound. She would press her palms into the red earth and whisper, "God of my mothers, do not let me be a tree without fruit. Let me hold a child in these arms." Mama Adunni often watched her from the doorway. She said nothing, but her silence carried weight. Then one morning, Amina felt a change within her body. A stillness. A warmth. Days later, the village midwife smiled and nodded. "The seed has taken root," she said gently. When the news reached the compound, joy burst like a drumbeat. Tund lifted his hands to the sky. "At last!" he shouted. Neighbors gathered. Women clapped. A small drum sounded in the courtyard, its rhythm soft but hopeful. Mama Adunni stood tall, her face serious but proud. "May it be a strong boy," she declared. "A son to carry our name." Amina lowered her eyes and smiled, holding her stomach with both hands. She did not speak her own prayer aloud. She simply whispered inside her heart, "Let the child be healthy." The days that followed were filled with cautious happiness. But happiness in that village was never alone, it always walked with expectation. At the well, where secrets floated like fallen leaves, the women leaned closer to one another. "Do you think she will give them a son?" one asked. "She has waited long," another replied. "The ancestors may reward her." A third woman clicked her tongue. "Mama Adunni needs a grandson. Without one, who will guard their land?" Their words were not meant to harm, but they traveled on the wind and settled heavily on Amina's shoulders. Each time she passed, conversations paused. Smiles stretched too wide. One market day, when the sun was high and traders shouted over piles of tomatoes and dried fish, Tund took Amina to the small clinic in the nearby town. The nurse pressed a cool device against Amina's belly. The room was quiet except for a faint, rapid sound. Then the nurse frowned slightly, then smiled in surprise. "You are blessed," she said. Tund grinned. "Blessed with a son." The nurse shook her head gently. "Blessed with 3 heartbeats." "3?" Amina whispered, her eyes widening. "Yes," the nurse nodded. 3 children grow inside you." The news traveled faster than a harmattan wind. By evening, the entire village knew. 3. Mama Adunni repeated when they told her. She sat slowly on her wooden stool. 3 mouths. Her joy did not rise this time. It sank like a stone dropped in water. That night, she counted on her fingers. More food. More clothes. More school fees. Her brows tightened. "What if they are girls?" she muttered. "Multiples often come as daughters. I have seen it before." The next day, whispers grew stronger. "Multiples bring daughters," someone said at the grinding stone. "It is the way of nature," another added. "When the womb overflows, it pours out girls." Such words, carried by superstition, settled into Mama Adunni's heart like seeds of fear. Amina, however, moved through the days with quiet strength. She walked slowly now, her hands resting on her growing belly. When the sun set, she often sat beneath the great baobab tree. Its trunk was thick and steady, its roots deep in the soil. Mama Adunni stood not far away, watching her. The older woman was like that baobab, tall, commanding, unbending. And Amina, with her 3 unseen children, felt like tender seedlings pushing through the ground beneath its shadow. One evening, Mama Adunni approached her. 3 children is not a small matter," she said firmly. "You must pray that at least one is a boy. Our name depends on it." Amina looked up respectfully. "Mama, I pray for healthy children." "That is not enough," Mama Adunni replied sharply. "A house without a son is a house without a future." Amina lowered her gaze again, but her hands remained steady on her stomach. Above them, the baobab stood silent. The wind moved gently through its branches, as if whispering a truth older than both women, a truth about pride, about fear, and about how the smallest seedlings can one day grow strong enough to change the shape of the sky. And in the quiet of that evening, as 3 tiny heartbeats continued beneath Amina's heart, the first real shadow of tension settled over the compound, waiting for the storm it would one day become. The night the children chose to enter the world, the sky did not sleep quietly. Dark clouds gathered like elders called to judge a serious matter. The wind moved through the village with urgency, lifting dust and shaking the doors of mud houses. The great baobab tree bent slightly, its leaves trembling as if it sensed that something powerful was about to happen. Inside the compound, Amina cried out as pain tightened around her body like a rope being pulled from both ends. "Call the midwife," Mama Adani ordered, her voice sharp but steady. Thunder rolled across the sky. Lightning split the darkness. Rain began to fall in heavy drops, beating against the roof like impatient fingers. The old women in the village often said, "When storms roar during birth, destiny is shifting." That night, destiny roared loudly. The midwife arrived, her wrapper soaked from the rain. She placed her bag beside the mat and knelt near Amina. "Breathe, my daughter," she said gently. "The river must flow before it becomes calm." Tund stood near the doorway, his hands shaking. He wanted to step closer, but tradition kept him back. Birth was women's work. Men waited outside with hope in their throats. Amina screamed again as thunder answered her from the sky. Then, through the storm and the darkness, a cry pierced the room. A small, sharp cry. "It is a girl," the midwife announced, smiling softly. Before anyone could fully respond, another pain came, stronger than the first. Amina gripped the mat, sweat covering her face. Another cry followed. "And another girl," the midwife said, her eyes widening with surprise. Mama Adani's back stiffened. The storm did not calm. Instead, it seemed to grow louder, as if heaven itself was leaning closer. Then the third wave came. Amina felt as though her body had become the earth itself, splitting open to bring forth life. The third baby cried, her voice clear and strong. The midwife lifted the tiny child and laughed in wonder. "3 blessings have arrived," she declared. 3 beautiful daughters." The words hung in the air like bright lanterns. But no one lit a drum. No one ululated in celebration. The room grew strangely quiet, even though rain continued to pound the roof. Mama Adani stepped forward slowly. She looked at the 3 small faces wrapped in cloth. They were soft. They were innocent. They were perfect. But her expression hardened like clay left too long in the sun. "Our house needs heirs," she said coldly. "Not burdens." Her words cut through the room like a blade. The midwife froze. Amina's tired eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from something deeper. Outside, Tund heard the third cry. His heart lifted for a moment. 3 children. 3 lives. He entered slowly. "They are healthy," the midwife told him gently. 3 daughters. Tund looked at his wife. He looked at his children. For a brief second, pride flickered in his eyes. But then he felt his mother's gaze on him. Heavy. Expecting. Demanding. He lowered his eyes. He said nothing. In that silence, something fragile broke. Amina held her daughters close to her chest. They were warm against her skin. Their tiny breaths rose and fell like small waves. She had expected joy. She had expected relief. Instead, the air in the room felt thick. The same walls that once echoed with laughter now felt narrow and cold. The fire in the corner gave little warmth. Rain continued through the night, washing the red earth clean. But inside the compound, no cleansing came. By morning, the storm had passed. The sky looked innocent again, bright and wide as if nothing had happened. But the true storm had only just begun. In the days that followed, Mama Adani's eyes changed. Where there had once been guarded hope, there was now open resentment. She no longer lingered near Amina's sleeping mat. She did not offer advice about feeding or bathing the babies. Her hands, which had once shown strength and care, remained folded behind her back. When neighbors visited, she spoke with a tight smile. 3 girls, she would say. The gods have strange humor. Soon, her words grew sharper. She has brought a curse of daughters into my house, Mama Adani whispered one afternoon to a woman pounding cassava nearby. 3 at once. Tell me, is that not a sign? The woman's eyes widened. Some say when the womb overflows, it carries misfortune, she replied carefully. Such words spread quickly. At the grinding stone, women began to speak in lower tones when Amina approached. 3 girls, one murmured. Poor thing, another sighed, but she did not step forward to help. Amina felt their pity like small stones thrown gently but repeatedly at her back. At home, the babies cried often, as babies do. Their voices filled the compound. But there were no grandmother songs to soothe them. Mama Adunni refused to carry them. I am too old to chase after daughters, she said when Tund asked her softly. Milk was given without blessing. Cradles swung without joyful stories. The air grew heavy. Tund, once talkative and warm, became quiet. He spent longer hours on the farm. When he returned, he avoided looking at Amina for too long. One evening, as the sun sank low, Amina spoke gently. They are your daughters, she said. Look how strong they are. Tund hesitated. He touched one tiny hand. The baby gripped his finger. His face softened. But from inside the house, his mother's voice rose. Do not forget, Mama Adunni called out, a man is measured by his sons. Tund's shoulders tightened. That night, he lay awake, staring into darkness. He loved his children. He loved his wife. But he feared disappointing his mother more than he feared losing himself. And so he remained silent. In that silence, resentment took deeper root. The courtyard that once welcomed Amina now watched her with cold eyes. The baobab tree stood tall as always, but even its shadow felt heavier. For in a house where joy is rejected and truth is silenced, bitterness grows like weeds after rain. And the 3 small girls, unaware of the storm their birth had stirred, slept peacefully, tiny lights in a compound slowly being consumed by darkness. The sun stood over the village like a jealous king who refused to blink. Day after day, it burned the earth without mercy. The once green farm behind the compound began to lose its color. Maize stalks bent like tired old men. The cassava leaves curled inward as if hiding from shame. Even the goats grew thin, their ribs showing like fingers pressing against skin. Women whispered that the soil had forgotten its song. Men looked at the sky and shook their heads. The rain has turned its back on us, they said. But inside the courtyard, another blame was taking root. Mama Adunni stood before the drying yam barn, her wrapper tied tight around her waist. She looked at the crying babies in Amina's arms and clicked her tongue. Since these children entered this house, she said sharply, our blessings have been leaking like a cracked pot. Amina lowered her eyes but held her daughters close. Mother, they are only children, she whispered. Children. Mama Adunni snapped. They are 3 mouths. 3 drains on our strength. The land was never this stubborn before. Soon, every empty basket became their fault. Every weak harvest carried their names. Mama Adunni would point toward the hut and say, Tiny cries, big hunger. They are draining this household. At night, Tund sat with small coins spread before him. He counted them once, then again, as if numbers could change by fear alone. 3 daughters slept beside their mother, their breathing soft like small drums. He looked at them, then at the coins. School fees, food, clothes, he muttered. How will we survive? Amina heard him and felt her heart tighten. They are not curses, she said gently. They are seeds. Give them time. But fear speaks louder than hope when stomachs are empty. One evening, the elders gathered under the old baobab tree. Their walking sticks rested beside them like silent judges. Mama Adunni spoke first. Our lineage is thinning, she said. A house without sons is like a tree without roots. The eldest man cleared his throat. In our father's time, sons guarded the land. Sons carried the name. Another added, daughters marry and water another family's soil. Their words moved slowly but heavily, like stones rolling downhill. No one spoke of love. No one spoke of fairness. Tradition stood tall, and tenderness bent low. Tund sat among them, his head bowed. The wind lifted dust around his feet, but he did not move. He felt like a child again, trapped between obedience and truth. When the meeting ended, the decision was not shouted, but it hung in the air like harmattan smoke, thick and choking. The next morning, Mama Adunni's anger burst like a calabash thrown against stone. She stormed into Amina's room and dragged out folded wrappers and baby cloths. One by one, she threw them into the courtyard dust. "Take your burdens with you," she shouted. "I will not watch this house sink." Neighbors stopped at their doorways. Children paused their games. Even the elders watched from a distance, their faces hard like carved wood. Mama Aduni's voice rose above them all. "I don't want more girls. This house needs sons." The words cut through the village like a sharp blade. Amina felt each one pierce her chest. She looked at Tund, hoping, just once, that he would stand beside her. But Tund stood frozen. His hands hung at his sides. His lips trembled, yet no sound came out. His silence roared louder than any shout. He chose fear over courage, obedience over justice. Amina swallowed her tears. With steady hands, she wrapped her 3 daughters onto her back and chest, tying the cloth firmly. The babies stirred but did not cry. It was as if they understood that their mother needed strength, not noise. She stepped into the courtyard. The same walls that once held laughter now felt cold and distant. She looked at them one last time. "May the earth judge between us," she said softly. No one stopped her. As the sun began to sink, painting the sky with red and gold, Amina walked away from the compound. Each step felt heavy, yet her back remained straight. The village watched her silhouette move toward the fading light. The sun died slowly that evening, as if mourning with her. But in African lands, when the sun dies, it promises to rise again. And though one chapter closed in dust and shame, another was already waiting beyond the horizon, quiet, unseen, but alive. The road to the city stretched before Amina like a ribbon of red dust. Each step lifted small clouds that clung to her wrapper and to the babies tied against her body. The sun watched her closely, as if asking, "Will you turn back?" She did not. Hope walked on her right side. Fear walked on her left. Between them, she carried 3 small lives and a heart that refused to break. When the town finally rose before her, it did not welcome her with drums or smiles. It stood tall and busy, filled with strangers who did not know her name. That first night, she found space inside a small church where other women slept on thin mats. "God sees you," an old woman whispered, sharing half of her cloth. "I pray he does," Amina replied softly. Some nights, when the church was full, she slept under a wooden stall in the market. Rats ran in the dark. The wind carried voices she did not trust. She wrapped her daughters close, her ears awake even when her eyes closed. Hunger soon became their silent companion. There were days when her stomach growled louder than the babies. The girls fell ill with fever, their tiny bodies burning against her skin. "Maybe I should go back," she once murmured, tears falling onto their foreheads. But she remembered the dust of shame. She remembered the words that cut like knives. "No," she told herself firmly. "A broken pot can be remolded, but pride once crushed is hard to lift." She refused to stretch her hands for pity. Instead, she borrowed a small tray and filled it with vegetables bought on credit. She woke before dawn, arranged tomatoes and peppers carefully, and called out to passers-by. "Fresh and honest goods. Come and buy." Her voice was soft but steady. When coins dropped into her palm, they felt like seeds of a new beginning. Later, she added small handmade beads and woven cloth. She worked until her feet ached, but her back stayed straight. In that harsh soil of struggle, her daughters began to grow. The firstborn watched everything with quiet eyes. She would sit beside her mother and study the faces of customers. "Mama," she once said, "that woman will return tomorrow. She trusts you." Her voice held wisdom beyond her small years. The second daughter was different. Her words rolled out bold and clear, like the talking drum in the village square. When a man tried to underpay Amina, she stepped forward. "Fair trade brings good fortune," she said firmly. The man, surprised, paid the full amount. The third child carried gentleness like morning rain. She shared her small bread with another hungry child and wiped her mother's sweat with tender hands. "Mama, do not be sad," she would whisper. "The sun will rest soon." Years passed like turning pages. The small tray became a wooden table. The wooden table became a proper stall with a shade above it. Amina saved every coin. She treated customers with honesty. If tomatoes were bruised, she said so. If prices rose, she explained why. Your goods are clean, women told her. Your heart is clean too. Some market women began to stand beside her. They had known their own nights of tears. They shared advice, watched her stall when she was ill, and sometimes slipped extra vegetables into her basket. We rise together, one of them said. A single broomstick breaks, but a bundle is strong. Soon, books appeared in her daughter's hands. They walked to school with neat braids and bright eyes. Teachers spoke of their sharp minds and good manners. These girls will go far, one teacher told Amina. Her heart swelled like a river in rainy season. Back in the village, the farm still struggled. The soil remained stubborn. Tun stood in his field, staring at weak crops. Each dry leaf felt like a reminder. At night, he sat alone, hearing echoes of crying babies he once refused to defend. Mama Adunni grew thin and bitter. Illness clung to her bones. Spirits are against us, she muttered. Fate has turned. But sometimes, in quiet moments, even she wondered if it was not spirits, but choices, that had shaped their suffering. And far away in the city, under a strong wooden stall filled with color and life, Amina lifted her face to the sky. The same sun that once watched her walk in shame now shone upon her with warmth. For in African lands, the earth remembers every tear, and one day it answers. The village stirred as the first drumbeats echoed across the red dust plains. Men lifted their heads from tilled soil, and women paused their sweeping. Children dropped their play and ran toward the sound. Smoke curled from cooking fires, mixing with the scent of ripe yams and roasted maize. Elders gathered under the old baobab, staffs in hand, eyes shining like the river in sunlight. The annual festival had begun, a time of songs, harvest dances, and public honor. It was a day for the village to celebrate its strength, its stories, and its children. From the horizon, a figure appeared on the winding road, dust rising gently beneath her steps. Amina walked steadily, her back straight, her eyes calm. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that had grown from years of hardship. The wind lifted her wrapper lightly, revealing simple, elegant embroidery she had stitched herself. There was no trace of shame in her movement, only a subtle power born of experience and endurance. 3 small silhouettes followed closely behind, moving in rhythm with her steps. The triplets, now 3 years old, walked as if the morning sun had shaped them. Their braids were neat, their hands clasped politely at their sides. Each step they took seemed measured and deliberate, their faces calm but radiant. Their eyes, bright with curiosity and wisdom beyond their years, reflected the care, patience, and love that had nurtured them in the city. The villagers froze. Whispers that had once circulated like wind now died in the air. Eyes widened as they observed the transformation before them, the mother who had been cast out, now tall and composed, and the daughters who carried themselves like young queens, unbroken by hardship. Mothers clutched their children, elders rubbed their eyes, and men whispered among themselves, unsure whether to rejoice or fear. Amina lifted her gaze to the baobab at the center of the village. Its branches, twisted and strong, seemed to nod in recognition, as if the earth itself honored the journey of the mother and her daughters. A hush fell over the square. Even the drums seemed to pause, waiting for the next movement, the next word, the next step of justice finally walking home. Look, a woman whispered to her neighbor. It is her. She has returned. And in that moment, the village felt the quiet turning of fate. The balance had begun to shift. The years of suffering, patience, and growth had prepared a stage where honor and truth could finally be revealed. Mama Adunni sat beneath the shade of the old baobab, her hand trembling slightly as it rested on her staff. Her once powerful voice, which had commanded obedience and hushed every dissent, now wavered like the evening wind. The lines on her face deepened, not only with age, but with the weight of choices that had eroded her authority. Each faltering breath seemed to echo the emptiness of her household, a stark contrast to the bustling home she had once ruled. Beyond the compound, the fields lay barren. Dust rose in pale clouds where maize had once swayed like golden waves. The cattle were thin, their eyes dull and wary, and the granaries echoed hollowly with emptiness. Mama Adunni's pride, once rooted in control and expectation, now crumbled with every failed harvest, as though the land itself had turned against her judgment. Tun stood nearby, shoulders stooped, hands clasped in front of him. His eyes, once bright with youth and ambition, now carried the weight of silent regret. He remembered the day he had let his mother's anger dictate his actions, when he failed to defend the woman who had loved him with patience and courage. He thought of Amina, surviving alone in the city, raising daughters with wisdom, resilience, and pride he had never nurtured. Each day, the echoes of his inaction pressed against him, heavier than any burden the soil could give. A murmured conversation rose among the villagers, but it quickly fell silent as they watched the mother of the triplets approach the gathering beneath the baobab. The children, neat and composed, walked beside her like young warriors, carrying knowledge, grace, and the dignity of survival. One of the daughters stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "We are daughters. Our mothers are not cursed." The strength of a family is not measured by sons alone, but by love, wisdom, and courage shared through every child. Applause broke across the courtyard, like sudden rain quenching parched earth. Elders nodded, impressed by the truth carried in the child's words. Eyes that had once whispered shame now opened wide in respect, and hearts once hardened by custom began to bend. Murmurs turned to cheers, as the village celebrated resilience, and the story of Amina's family became a lesson written not in fear, but in honor. Tun's eyes glistened. Mama Aduni's hand trembled against her staff. The voices that had been silent for too long now lifted in praise, and for the first time, the balance of justice began to tilt in favor of truth. The courtyard fell silent as Amina and Mama Aduni stood facing each other. The red earth beneath their feet, once a witness to joy and sorrow alike, seemed to hold its breath. Elders and neighbors gathered around, their eyes wide, waiting. No drumbeats, no whispers, just the weight of generations pressing down on that moment. Mama Aduni's gaze swept over her granddaughters. Their small hands clasped politely at their sides, their eyes bright with confidence and curiosity. The oldest held her head high, speaking without arrogance but with quiet wisdom. The middle one's expression radiated courage, and the youngest's gentle demeanor softened the hard edges of the world around them. In that instant, Mama Aduni saw what her pride had refused to see for years: strength, intelligence, grace, and love that could not be contained by narrow expectations. Her chest tightened. She whispered to herself, "All this time, I have been blind." The villagers sensed her words, even if barely audible, and a ripple of murmurs spread. She remembered the cold words she had spoken when Amina gave birth to girls: "Our house needs heirs, not burdens." She felt the weight of every lie, every harsh judgment, every tear she had caused. A gentle rain began, pattering softly on the clay roofs and the parched earth. Each drop seemed to wash away the dust of old errors, softening the bitterness that had hardened her heart. The crowd stayed still, the moment sacred, as if even the sky mourned with her. Tears welled in Mama Aduni's eyes, spilling over and streaking her weathered cheeks. Her voice trembled, breaking the silence. I was wrong," she confessed, each word falling like a seed of truth. "Daughters are not curses. I have lived in pride and fear, and my blindness has destroyed what I loved most." Tun stepped forward, shoulders heavy, eyes lowered. "Mother, and Amina," he murmured, voice quivering. "I was weak when I should have been strong. I chose silence, and it has cost us everything. Forgive me." Amina's gaze softened, and she nodded slowly. The crowd exhaled as though the village itself had been holding its breath for decades. The rain continued to fall, washing the red earth and symbolizing the first cleansing of hearts hardened by tradition. In that courtyard, under the open sky, pride gave way to humility, pain yielded to forgiveness, and the path for healing began to emerge. Amina stood in the center of the courtyard, the wind brushing gently against her face. The weight of years of struggle rested on her shoulders, yet she carried it with a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any shout. The villagers watched, holding their breaths, sensing the transformation from the timid bride they once pitied to a mother who had endured storms of hardship and emerged unbroken. Her gaze swept over Mama Aduni, who now trembled slightly, aware that the power of choice had shifted. Amina's mind weighed her options. Could she repay years of cruelty with anger, bitterness, and revenge? The old customs urged her to strike back, to teach lessons in pride and fear, but her heart, shaped by love for her daughters, whispered a different path. "I will not let hatred grow where my children will walk," Amina said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "We rise above, so they may rise too." The rain from earlier had ceased, leaving the courtyard fresh and fragrant. Amina approached her mother-in-law slowly, her steps deliberate, her voice calm. "I forgive you," she said, the words carrying no arrogance, only a protective grace. "Not because the past disappears, but because my daughters deserve a future unburdened by bitterness." Tund lowered his head, relief and shame mingling in his expression. Amina's calm acceptance radiated strength, showing that true power needed no loud declaration. The villagers, once witnesses to cruelty and pride, now saw a new lesson unfold. Mercy could wield more force than anger, and dignity could reshape the world. Later, around the family table, the healing began. Quiet conversations mingled with laughter, shared meals replaced silence, and the triplets brought knowledge from school to the once parched fields. They demonstrated new ways to nurture the soil, turning dry, cracked land into green shoots rising like hope from hardship. Mama Adunni watched in awe as the household learned to value each child, regardless of gender. Tund worked beside Amina and the girls, their unity marking a shift that no old fear or superstition could undo. In that courtyard, under the wide African sky, forgiveness had sown its first seeds, and life, bright, resilient, and fair, began to bloom once more. The village lay quiet beneath the sprawling arms of the ancient baobab, its thick trunk like a sentinel of time. The elder, bent with years but sharp in voice, raised his hands to the gathered crowd. "Remember this, children of the soil," he said, his words rolling like distant thunder across the courtyard. "A child is not measured by the body they were born in, but by the light they bring to their family and their village." The villagers, once divided by whispers and pride, listened in reverent silence. The baobab's roots stretched deep into the red earth, anchoring the village in strength not found in a single branch, but in the unity of its people. "As the tree stands, so too must we support one another," the elder continued, gesturing toward Amina and her daughters. From the edge of the field, the triplets ran across the open horizon, their laughter rising like the wings of birds. The wind caught their skirts, lifting them as if the earth itself celebrated their freedom. Each step they took was light, unburdened by old beliefs, carrying hope, courage, and equality. Mothers, fathers, and neighbors watched, hearts swelling with the knowledge that the future would no longer be chained by fear, superstition, or the narrow vision of tradition. Amina stood beneath the baobab, smiling softly, her daughter's hands in hers. The red soil, the open sky, and the roots beneath their feet seemed to hum with possibility. In that moment, the village fell whole again, and the lessons of the past were carried forward, not as chains, but as wisdom, like the deep roots of the eternal baobab.